Okay, so we're essentially all done with talking about cells for themselves. Now we need to start looking at how do cells operate as part of the larger organism. Okay, so I'm going to go over that, and then I'm going to talk about your microscopy lab reports, okay, once I've gone through this. So don't let me forget to go over those. Okay, all right. So we got to look at first, how did multicellularity evolve? And we are going to talk a little bit about, okay, how evolution, natural selection works. We're also going to talk about why that is not contradictory to what you learned in religion class, because it isn't. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to look at the role of specialization in multicellularity, and that is a key word because without specialization, you do not have multicellularity. Right? There's essentially two kinds of multicellular organisms. Okay, ones that are colonies where all the cells are the same, and ones that are true multicellular organisms where this group of cells does this job and this group of cells is specialized to do this job. So if they have specialization, okay, then they are a true multicellular organism. Okay. And then lastly, we're going to look at the plant as an example of a multicellular organism. So we'll be looking at, okay, there are some, let's say, specialized cells within the plant that do a certain job. And in fact, that's going to relate to the leaf that you looked at yesterday, not yesterday, day before yesterday, okay? No, yesterday, in the cell anatomy lab, okay? We'll talk about the layers of the leaf that you guys actually looked at through the microscope. Okay, so first off, multicellularity and how it evolved, okay? There are actually, in the fossil record, several times where multicellularity appeared independently. Okay, so there wasn't like a first multicellular organism. Multicellularity appeared actually a few times. Most of the branches in that part of the tree died. Okay, so not all of the multicellular organisms that evolved actually continued on. Some of them just went extinct. Okay, but fortunately for us, a few groups did make it on, okay, and we eventually evolved from those. Okay, so in regards to this whole idea of evolution and natural selection, okay, a lot of people consider that the two are the same thing. Okay, natural selection is the mechanism by which evolution happens. All right, so they aren't the same thing. One causes the other. Right? So we'll start with natural selection because it is the cause of evolution. Okay, natural selection is very simply nature choosing what organisms survive and pass on their genes based on their physical and genetic traits. Okay, so if I'm comparing, like if I've got some organisms in the wild, all right, those organisms that are best able to compete for food, habitat, okay, and other necessary resources survive and have enough energy to reproduce and pass on their genes better than organisms that are less well adapted, even if those are organisms within the same population. So if I have, let's say, a pack of wolves, okay, within this pack of wolves, there's a fair amount of genetic variation. Right? That could be in coloration, it could be in size, it could be in strength, eyesight, ability to, be dominant over other members of the pack and things like that. All right. So let's say that within this pack, there's one wolf that has better eyesight in the dark than its pack mates. Okay. Would that be an advantage for that wolf? Okay. Will it be able then to hunt both day and night? Okay, so that means it'll get more food. Will that make it stronger? Okay, will it be able to compete for mates better than its pack mates would? Does that mean it'll pass on its genes more often? Okay, so that's natural selection. Natural selection determined that this organism was stronger, okay, and as a result, reproduced and passed on its genes more often. Over time, that organism and its offspring and its offspring's offspring and so on, okay, will continue to have an advantage over the other members. And so what will happen is the genes for having better eyesight at night will start to become more common. And before long, all the wolves in that pack, and I mean like over the course of, let's say, several generations, okay, so this could be 20 or 30 years, okay, or even longer than that, okay, eventually that pack of wolves will have all better eyesight, okay, or the ability to see at night. Over an even longer course of time, the whole species may change. Okay? Because maybe some members of that pack go off and join other packs, and they bring those genes with them, and those genes are an advantage in that situation. And pretty soon, all we have is every wolf on Earth has better eyesight. Now, that would take probably thousands of years to happen, but it would happen. That's evolution. Natural selection is essentially replacing something over the course of time. Okay? So in terms of an improvement, natural selection and evolution take kind of a long time. In terms of deciding something's not good, that's immediate. Okay? If, let's say, a wolf in that pack was born and it couldn't see at all, it's completely blind, what would happen to that wolf? It would die. Okay? Nature's cruel. Okay? Not being able to see in any population other than human population is lethal. Okay? You cannot find food, you will die. Okay? And so the gene for being blind would be eliminated almost immediately. Right? And I say that doesn't happen in human population because we're smart enough and well enough equipped that we can, that more of us survive even if we have, let's say, genetic codes that maybe wouldn't in nature allow us to survive. Okay? I would be included in that. Right? If I didn't have glasses, I wouldn't be able to find food. Okay, I can't count my fingers in front of my face if I'm not wearing my glasses. Right, so obviously, if it was a natural environment and I didn't have my glasses, I'd die. Okay, and so that wouldn't be good. All right, everyone kind of follow there. All right, so that's how natural selection and evolution work. All right, now for the longest time, there was this belief that the church said evolution is wrong. Okay, and for a time, there was a time when the church actually did say that. Okay, but the church no longer thinks that. Okay, Pope Francis is actually, did anyone know that he has a degree in chemistry? He's actually a scientist too. Okay, but he has come out and said, look, the church, and for quite a while, the church's standpoint on evolution and the idea of how the earth came to be is not in contradiction with what science says. Okay, so the idea that humans may have evolved from other organisms, the church has no problem with that. Okay, the church isn't saying that the earth was created in 6 days and that the earth has only been around for 5,000 years. The church doesn't say that. Okay, there are some religions that do. Okay, and the people that are in those religions are what we call fundamentalists. Okay, fundamentalists believe in the literal truth of the Bible. So whatever's in the Bible, word for word, that is the truth. All right. What the Catholic Church believes is that a lot of the stuff in the Bible is actually metaphor. Okay, it's a story told to communicate an idea, but isn't meant to be taken literally. Okay, and the most important part of that is that we're never meant to take the book of Genesis and the creation story literally. Okay, the 6 days is a metaphor for how long it actually took for Earth to form, life to appear, okay, and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, it doesn't make God any less powerful to say that it took 4.5 billion years to make the Earth the way it is now. Okay, I mean, yes, 6 days sounds a lot more impressive. Okay, but 4.5 billion years to make all that happen is also an okay idea. Everybody with me there? Okay. So if we look at what it says in the Bible about the order in which everything happened, it's actually also the order science says everything happened in. Okay, light, Big Bang, probably pretty bright. Okay, that was kind of the birth of everything. All right, the sun forms, the earth forms. Okay, then the oceans form, and then the land, and then all that kind of stuff. All of that is essentially the same order in which science says that it all happens. All right, so we're going to kind of look at that right now. Okay, so here's kind of the timeline, okay, through which Earth came to be. So about 10 billion years ago or so, maybe a little more than that, there was a giant supernova that essentially put a bunch of matter into the area where our solar system is found today. Okay, over the course of the next, let's say, 4 to 5 billion years, that stuff started to coalesce into a planetary nebula, which is basically just a cloud of gas and dust and rock. Right? That stuff starts moving together because of gravity. Okay? The biggest gravity source or well in our solar system is where the sun is. Okay? So most of the material in this cloud got kind of sucked in by gravity to the center of it and became the sun. right? Most of that is hydrogen gas. So most of the hydrogen gas came into the middle, and eventually there was enough of it there, enough mass, that the mass of it had enough gravity to pull the gases together so hard that fusion occurred. Okay, that's what powers the sun, is the fact that there's enough gravity to essentially crush hydrogen atoms together, okay, in what is known as nuclear fusion. That's what releases energy. Okay, so essentially the sun ignited one day when it got big enough. Okay, nuclear fusion occurred, and that nuclear fusion will continue to occur for another 4 to 5 billion years or so before the sun starts doing some freakishly weird things. So we got 4 billion years to figure out where else to go, because the sun will eventually swell up and swallow the Earth. Yeah. So, well, not every planet. It'll get just inside of Mars's orbit if models hold true. Not going to be our problem. We're not going to be around then. Okay. Well, you and I won't be, but who knows? I don't. It would look like a big giant sun coming to burn me. I don't want that. Well, it would happen so slowly. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, we've got the sun forming in there. We've got a bunch of dust and rock and whatever else. Okay, since there's so much debris floating around, it runs into each other a lot. Okay, and as it runs into each other, some of it sticks together because the collisions produce a lot of heat and make the rock kind of molten. Okay, and so you essentially get these blobs of molten rock starting to form. Those form the planets, Earth being one of them. Okay. So about 4.6 billion years ago, there is a chunk of rock, okay, kind of molten on the surface, not really cooled off, okay, where the Earth is today. It's quite a bit smaller than the Earth is today, but it's there. Okay, so the Earth forms, okay, and it's pulling in lots of meteorites hitting it, all that kind of stuff. This is the period of time known as the late heavy bombardment. Okay, this is the time in Earth's history where it got hit by basically everything all the time. All right. That's also how the moon was formed. Okay, so about between this time is when the moon formed, because Earth got hit by a Mars-sized object. Okay, there were two kind of big blobs of rock floating around, and they crossed each other's path. Okay, and the Mars-sized object ran into Earth. It wasn't a head-on collision; it was kind of a glancing blow. Okay, and essentially what happened was it liquefied both. Okay, one big blob stayed together and formed the Earth, and this cloud of debris formed kind of a spiral around the Earth that coalesced and formed the moon. Okay? We know this to be, or we believe this to be true, and kind of know this to be true because the makeup of the moon and the Earth is very similar. Okay? And the only way that could be true is if they came from similar material or from the same object. Okay? All right, after that collision, Earth starts to cool off. There's a layer of gases around it as well, and as it cools, some of those gases can condense and fall back as a liquid, mostly water vapor. Okay, so as water starts to fall onto this hot rock, it starts to cool the rock, and eventually we get big puddles called oceans starting to form, okay, in the lower places on the Earth. All right, that's like 3.9 to 3.8 billion years ago. We start getting the oceans forming, and the first very simple single-celled organisms appear on Earth. Okay, so for the first 1.5 billion years of Earth's existence, it was completely sterile. Right? There was nothing alive on Earth. Now, at this time, Earth is not like Earth now. Okay? The atmosphere is toxic. Okay? It is made of a completely different combination of gases than it is now. Carbon dioxide, ammonia, okay, nitrogen. It would have been like corrosive. Okay, so well, not so much like Venus, which is like almost 100% carbon dioxide. There was a lot of nitrogen in ours. Okay, so we've got the Earth here, and it's got this very different atmosphere, but some of the organisms that are forming produce oxygen. They're photosynthetic. Okay, they're very well adapted to their environment, and they start producing a fair amount of oxygen. Okay, so over the course of the next billion years or so it's not like the blink of an eye. Okay, it's over 1 billion years. These photosynthesizing bacteria start pumping lots of oxygen into the atmosphere, which also cools the Earth further because they're using up carbon dioxide and producing oxygen and lowering the Earth's greenhouse effect. Okay, this causes two things to happen. First off, there's a tipping point where the Earth's atmosphere's composition hits a tipping point where it becomes toxic to many of the organisms that live on Earth. Okay? They can't handle the free oxygen. They evolved in an atmosphere that was much different, and they die off. Okay? And the Earth gets a lot colder. because now the greenhouse effect is gone. Okay, this actually causes the first mass extinction. Okay, everything's microscopic, so it's not like, ooh, the dinosaurs died. I mean, but it's like millions of different kinds of bacteria died, right? And yeah, exactly. Okay, so we've got these organisms now that are able to survive in this environment. Now, another 500 million years goes by. Okay, oxygen is continuing to build, and single-celled organisms are getting bigger. Right, so they're less simple. They're not just bacteria. Okay, we're starting to get like eukaryotic cells. Okay, and at the very end of this, the first multicellular organisms appear. Now, on this diagram, you see this purple line? You see how it's getting wider? Okay, this purple line represents the diversity of life on Earth. Okay, as soon as multicellular organisms appear, okay, the width of this line just starts to explode. Okay, starts to get really big because multicellular organisms are specialized. They can fit in lots of different niches, and it is pronounced niche, not niche. That's the French way of saying it. Okay, niche. All right. So there's lots of different places where these multicellular organisms can fit and adapt and survive. Okay, about 1 billion years ago, okay, we start getting not just photosynthetic multicellular organisms, but now we start getting organisms that can eat other things. First animals start to appear. Okay, and once the first animals appear, there's kind of a lot for them to eat because plants have been around, or plant-like organisms have been around for a really, really long time with nothing to eat them. So there's lots of them there. And again, this diversity of life just takes off because now animals are around and there's lots for them to eat. Okay, so we see that the line goes from being like purplish blue to just getting really, really wide. And at the end of this diagram, life's not even out on the land yet. Okay, it's just still in the ocean. Right, so there's even more of this where it would be as wide as the room probably. Okay, when we get to kind of the most diverse part of it. All right, but this took obviously quite a while. Everybody with me there? Okay. Okay, so the key thing here about multicellular organisms, okay, what distinguishes a multicellular organism from a colony of cells, which is not a true multicellular organism, is the division of labor. Okay, division of labor is also known as specialization. Right? Some cells do this job, some cells do that job. Cells can all carry out the basic functions, but they're specialized to do this one. All right? We're prime examples of that. We have many different groups of cells within our body. Okay? We have nerve cells whose job is to relay information by electrical impulse. No other cells in our body can do that. Okay? We have muscle cells that can change their shape and help us move around. Okay? We have cells in our stomach that secrete enzymes and hydrochloric acid to digest our food. Right? We have lots of different kinds of cells in our body, and each type of cell is specialized to do a certain job. Okay? The picture that you see on this slide is of a colony of cells, not a true multicellular organism, because all those cells are exactly the same. Okay, so every one of them has to do the same jobs. Okay, so that's a colony versus a true multicellular organism. All right, so as this happens, okay, we see some major changes and we see some improvements to cells and to organisms and things like that. Okay, increased specialization leads to increased complexity, which leads to increased size. Right? So we go from having very small multicellular organisms, very simple multicellular organisms, to more complex multicellular organisms, more complex plants, more complex animals, different structures, things like that. Okay, and you can see here, this is again showing some of the early, what early Earth would have looked like, a lot of volcanic activity. Earth's crust would have been a little thinner. Okay, but back when it was younger because it was still cooling. Okay, so lots more volcanoes. Life would have been mostly in the oceans, and we see these things here on the bottom called stratoliths. That would have been some of the first like algae and things like that that would have lived, and they would have lived in tidal pools. Okay, now early on in the Earth's history, when we had that impact that formed the moon. Okay, like you look at these two pictures. What do you notice about the moon? Yeah. It's not that the moon was bigger then, but it was a hell of a lot closer. Okay, because when it first formed, it was very, very close to the Earth. Now, what does the moon cause? Tides. Okay, the moon pulls on the ocean. Right? So when the moon is on, like if you're, let's say, in Newfoundland and you're sitting on the shore, okay, if the moon is where we can see it, then it's pulling the ocean away from us. Okay, so you're gonna have low tide. If the moon is on the other side of the planet where we can't see it, it's gonna pull the ocean towards us, and we're gonna get high and low tides. So as the Earth rotates underneath the moon, okay, then we get the different tides. Everybody follow me there? If the moon's a lot closer, not only are the tides a lot more, well, say a lot larger, but they're a lot more frequent, because instead of taking 29 point whatever days to go around the Earth, the moon goes around the Earth several times a day. Okay? So imagine the ocean's going like in and out, in and out, in and out several times a day. I mean, it already goes in and out like twice a day. Okay, but imagine it did that 9, 10, 12 times a day. Okay, it's constantly going to be bringing in nutrients and fresh water because it's going in and out, in and out. So it created a really fertile area, okay, along the shorelines for animals and plants to evolve. Okay. All right. Now, we're going to look at different types of cells within the plant. So we're looking at the plant now as an example of a multicellular organism with specialization. So the first cells we're going to look at are called parenchyma cells. Okay? And they are, and I just said specialized, but they're actually unspecialized. That's how they're specialized. Okay? They can become anything. Right? How many people have heard of the term stem cells before? Okay, so stem cells is a like type of cells that we try and harvest because stem cells can become anything. All right. So in your body produces what are called pluripotent stem cells. If we can harvest those and culture them, then we can grow different kinds of cells from them. Okay. There's a lot of research right now into using pluripotent stem cells for treatments for like osteoarthritis, for example. Okay, my orthopedic surgeon is always telling me that he wants to inject my stem cells into my knees to see if I can regrow my cartilage, right? Because when you get old like me, you don't have cartilage left. Okay, it's all messed up. So he figures if he can get some stem cells from my body and inject them into the knee, they'll grow into new cartilage, and my knee will like essentially repair itself. Okay, they've done a lot of these kind of treatments, and it works. Okay, because the stem cells he would inject would get into an environment where there would be certain chemical signals from my body that tell them this is the stuff that's needed here, and so it would grow. Okay, everyone kind of follow me on how that works. Okay, now in Canada, we don't allow embryonic stem cell research. Okay, we allow pluripotent stem cell research because we can take that from an adult. Okay, and in fact, the way they would get it is they do like a liposuction. Okay, they take some of my fat cells and in there are stem cells that they can use. Okay, but the other form of stem cell research is on embryonic stem cells. Where do you get those from? Well, not from dead fetuses. You get them from live ones. They will be dead after you harvest the stem cells. Okay, so to get embryonic stem cells, you need an embryo. Okay, when you're first developing and you're an embryo, okay, you're basically just a ball of cells. But every cell in that ball is destined to become something in your body. So if I grab the stem cells from that ball of cells that were destined to become a liver, okay, I can culture them and grow liver tissue. I'm not going to grow up like a liver, but I'll grow liver tissue. And then I could graft that onto someone with an unhealthy or damaged or whatever liver. Okay, same thing with a pancreas. If someone had diabetes, I could culture cells and graft them onto their pancreas, and their pancreas would then suddenly make insulin and they would no longer be diabetic. Okay, the problem is I take a life to save one. All right, at least that's what the belief is in Canada and in the Catholic Church as well. Okay, we can't put value on this life over that one. Okay, we believe that life begins at the moment of conception. Okay, that's not just a religious belief, there's a scientific backing to that. Okay, all the genetic material necessary to be you is present at the moment of conception. Okay, that's why we believe life begins then. Evan.
Can you potentially
Well, I mean, not so much injecting the stem cells, but if you could keep grafting tissue onto dying tissue, yes. But I mean, at what point do you cease to be who you were before? I mean, I can't graft brain tissue on and go, oh, well, it'll think the same as it did before, right? Eventually, no. The memories are ingrained in the connections already formed within my brain. If I just graft nerve tissue onto my brain, I'm not going to be smarter, okay? And the problem with nerve tissue is this doesn't work as well with nerve cells. Okay, nerve tissue doesn't work as well. Okay, they actually did do some research where they could graft across a broken spinal cord and essentially partially cure paralysis. Okay, when I was in university, one of my profs was doing that research, and they would intentionally sever the spinal cord of rats, and then they would grow this nerve tissue and graft it across the broken spine, and the rats would regain like 40 to 60% of the use of their legs after the procedure. Okay? Which, I mean, that's pretty promising. But again, where did they get that tissue from? Well, they took rat embryos and pulled the stuff that was going to become their nervous system out and cultured it and grew it and then grafted it across. Right? So, unfortunately, that guy's research has been kiboshed. He can't do that in Canada anymore, okay? Because we don't allow that kind of research. Okay, well, he could on rats, but not on human embryos. Right? Okay, so parenchyma cells are stem cells for a plant. Okay, this is generally why plants live so long. Put it away. Okay, this is why plants can live so long. Like some trees can live to be thousands of years old because they can always just replace tissue, okay, that gets old or sick or whatever with these stem cells. So you'll find these stem cells in like the buds and new tissue that grow on a plant. Okay, so in the bud of a plant, okay, that bud could become leaves, it could become a branch, okay, it could basically become anything the plant signals that it needs. So these parenchyma cells receive a chemical signal from the plant saying more leaf tissue is needed, those cells become leaf cells, okay, and grow into a leaf. All right, so they are specialized to become whatever the cell or the plant needs. Okay, water conducting cells have certain structure as well. Okay, within the plant there are tubes that carry water, there are tubes that carry sugar. They are constructed slightly differently, okay, in order to transport materials in different directions, but also materials of different viscosity. Okay, the sticky sap that comes out of a tree is the stuff that's got all the sugar in it. That's going from the leaves to the roots. Okay, the really runny sap is actually in the center of the tree. That's going from the roots to the leaves. Okay. And then these are the food conducting cells. Okay, they're the ones that carry the sticky sap, so they look quite a bit different because the sap in them is quite a bit more viscous. All right, layers of the leaf. This is probably the most important diagram for the second half of the unit. Layers of the leaf as an example of specialization in a multicellular organism. So make note of this diagram. It's going to come back over and over and over again. Okay, so yesterday you looked at this under the microscope. You may not have known that's what you were looking at, but this is what you were looking at. Okay, and I told you draw the cells in that layer. Right? Well, the cells in that layer are what we call the palisade cells. Okay, they're so called because there's rock formations that look like columns that are called palisades. That's whoever discovered it, that's what they named it. Okay, so they're columns of plant cells and they're packed really, really tight together. Okay? The purpose of packing them really tightly together is this is the layer of the leaf that carries out photosynthesis. So we want as many cells and thus as many chloroplasts as possible packed into as small a space as possible. Okay? That way we carry out as much photosynthesis as we can. All right? So those cells have a certain structure. They're very rigid in shape, okay, so that they can be packed together. That's how they are specialized. They have lots of chloroplasts, a specific shape that allows them to be very dense, okay, and they can carry out photosynthesis. All right, on the top of the leaf and on the bottom of the leaf, okay, is a layer called the epidermis. Okay, so you can see that right here. Okay, that's this layer of cells. You could see that pretty clearly in your microscope the other day as well. Right, those cells had no chloroplasts in them. In fact, they were basically transparent. Okay? They're transparent because we want the light to get through them down to the palisade layer. The job of these epidermal cells is to secrete a waxy coating that goes over the leaf. Okay? If you've ever felt a leaf, it always feels a little bit waxy between your fingers. Okay? If you ever noticed like drops of water, they kind of bead and then they run off of the leaf. They don't absorb through the leaf. Okay, that's what the epidermis is designed to do, is create a seal on the leaf against evaporation. Okay, so having a layer of wax across the top of the leaf prevents it from drying out. Okay, water can't evaporate through the wax. Okay, it's kind of like the idea behind like chapstick. Okay, when people even know what chapstick is anymore. Okay, it's like lip balm. Okay, it's usually full of like wax. Okay, and the wax coats your lips and doesn't allow moisture to evaporate through, and so that can re-moisturize your lips. Okay, so something like that. Okay, so you got a waxy cuticle on both the top and the bottom of the leaf that prevents evaporation. So again, these cells are specialized to do one job. They don't carry out photosynthesis. That's not their job. Their job is to secrete a cuticle that prevents the plant from drying out. Okay, down below the palisade layer, we see cells that are very, very green, have lots of chloroplasts, but they're very irregularly shaped. Okay, they're shaped and they end up looking more like a sponge. And the spongy layer is where essentially oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water vapor all kind of get stored within the leaf. Okay, it's essentially where gases get exchanged for photosynthesis. So carbon dioxide comes in, oxygen goes out, water vapor goes out with it when that happens. Okay, that's where the gases get stored for exchange. Okay, that's why there's big gaps between the cells. We need spaces between the cells for those gases to sit. Okay, they can't do that in the palisade layer because there's no room. Okay. On the bottom of the leaf, so the epidermis is top and bottom, but on the bottom of the leaf, the epidermis has these little groups of specialized cells embedded in it. Okay. These specialized cells are called stomates, and they're actually made up of 2 cells each. So a stomate is made up of 2 cells called guard cells. Okay, so you can see that labeled here. Okay, there's a guard cell on each side of the stomate. The stomate controls how much evaporation occurs in the plant. And it does that by changing the shape of the guard cells. So a stomate is like a pore. It can be open or closed. When it's closed, water won't evaporate, carbon dioxide and oxygen won't exchange. The plant will stop carrying out photosynthesis if the stomates are closed. If the stomates are open, it can carry out photosynthesis. Right? If the stomates are open, however, water is evaporating. Okay? Can a plant allow water to evaporate 24 hours a day? No. If it does, it'll dry out. Okay? So the plant can control how much water evaporates by using these guard cells in the stomates. Okay? And now, it's not like the plant has a brain. It's not sending a message going, close the stomates now. Okay? It doesn't do that. Okay? What it does is it actually uses osmosis. Right? We talked about osmosis the other day. That's the transport of water across the membrane to balance what? Salts. Okay? So what happens is, as water evaporates out the stomates, the salts that were in it get left behind. Okay? Because the salt doesn't evaporate, just the water. So you start getting lots of salts in the spongy layer near the guard cells. And as that happens, water gets pulled out of the guard cells to balance the salt. And when that happens, the water vacuoles inside those cells can't push on the cells enough, and the cells change shape, shutting the stomate. When there's more water, the water vacuoles fill back up, and the stomate reopens. Right? So it naturally occurs as the plant starts to get too dry, the stomates just naturally close because of osmosis. So it's not something the plant has to consciously control. Right? Are those all examples of cells that have a specific job? Okay. Can these palisade cells do that job? They can't. Okay. The epidermal cells can't carry out photosynthesis. Okay. They just secrete a waxy cuticle. They're all specialized to do one thing. It's not that they can't do anything else. They can do other things, but there are certain jobs they're best at. Okay. So make sure that we know, okay, the layers of the leaf. Okay, this is just more of the stuff I just talked about here. Okay, we got to know what each part of the leaf does, okay, because those are our examples of specialization. Every year on the unit exam, I've got some question in the written response asking you to explain how the layers of the leaf are an example of specialization. So be able to tell me the epidermis is specialized to do this. The palisade layer is specialized to do this in this way, and so on. Be able to really explain how each part differs. Okay, so this is what I was talking about with the guard cells, okay, and how they're specialized to open and close the stomates and thus regulate the amount of water that evaporates. Under a microscope, this is what they look like. Okay, so this would be a stomate, and then each one of the red things would be a guard cell. Okay? When the guard cells have lots of water and the plant has lots of water, the water vacuoles push on the edges of the guard cell, okay, and make it very rigid, and it's shaped like a bean. Okay, so then the stomate is open. As the water leaves, okay, it can't maintain this shape anymore. Okay, and remember, it's leaving because there's more salts. Okay, so they change shape. They can't hold this rigid shape anymore, and that closes the stomate. All right, so as they lose water, the stomate naturally closes because of osmosis. Now, would that be a good way for me to have a question on a test that asks about cell transport as well as specialization at the same time? Would I do something like that? Definitely. Okay, that actually allows me to ask less questions on the test. If I can combine things into one question, there are less questions for you to answer. Okay, test is a little shorter. All right, so make sure you can explain this process. Okay, guard cells are the best example of specialization in a multicellular organism. Okay, and they're important in terms of regulating water loss, transport of water in plants, etc. Okay, questions on that stuff there? Okay. All right, I want you guys to answer those questions, complete sentences, maybe a couple of sentences for each one, okay? And we'll go over them here in a few minutes. All right, so first off, multicellularity superior to unicellularity, okay, so being multicellular versus being single-celled, okay? What are some of the competitive advantages? Right, yeah, okay, a single-celled organism has to be a jack of all trades, but a master of none. Okay, whereas a multicellular organism can have specialists. Okay, it has groups of cells for doing this job, groups of cells for doing this job. That makes them more efficient. Being more efficient means you can get bigger because you use your energy and your resources better. Now, the other thing with multicellular, and we didn't talk about this today, but we did talk about it the other day, okay, in terms of cell size, what happens if a single-celled organism gets really big? It has a hard time transporting by diffusion. Okay, well, that's an issue. But if you're multicellular, you don't have that problem. That's what we discovered with the cubes that we were looking at. So being multicellular allowed organisms to become big without having a problem transporting materials. Okay, it allowed them to overcome that problem. So that is also something you'll probably want to add to your answer. Okay, becoming multicellularity allowed organisms to become large, and bigger was better. Okay, than single-celled organisms because they didn't have the diffusion problem. Okay, how are the cells of the leaf different from cells found in the stem of a plant? Well, cells in the leaf have different jobs than the cells in the stem. Okay, cells in the stem transport material and support the plant, whereas cells in the leaf carry out photosynthesis, control water loss, secrete cuticles. They do a lot more jobs. Okay, so they're specialized, okay, to do different jobs. Okay, epidermis and stomates both have the job of controlling the amount of water that is lost from the plant. They just do it differently. Okay, the epidermis covers the entire plant and just stops evaporation, whereas the stomates can actually control it. They can allow it to happen, but stop it when they need to. All right, and describe how the stomate works. Okay, we went over that in detail. It's an osmotic thing. As this plant loses water, salts build up in the spongy layer, and that pulls water out of the guard cells, causing them to close. All right, so the concentration of salts helps to open and close the stomates. All right.